Can you first respond to what was concluded in Lima? What is the Lima Accord?
Well, thank you first, Amy, for allowing me to be here. What was agreed here was meant to be a roadmap towards the Paris next year, which was meant to be a comprehensive agreement to do two things. First of all, to actually increase the level of ambition, the level of emission reductions that were needed in the pre-2020, the most critical period. Because these climate talks, as we all know, took place in the context of super typhoons hitting again Philippines, droughts and floods around the world, climate scientists telling us we need to take much more urgent action, and 2014 being the hottest year on record. Now, the first component of that, in terms of taking action now, we saw very, very little. In fact, we saw nothing. We saw no revisiting of targets. We saw no increase in ambition. The second part of the framework is meant to be what is going to be agreed from 2020 onwards. And there again, you know, the president of the COP said everybody was a winner. Well, it was a face-saving compromise that maybe was a winner for the politicians and for political leaders, but it was a total and absolute failure for planet and for people. It didn't reduce emissions. There was no finance put on the table, no clear roadmap. It was weak language. It was lots of shalls, no shalls. It was basically full of loopholes.
I want to bring in Suzanne Goldenberg, who is still in Lima, Peru, the U.S. environment correspondent for The Guardian. You were there as the talks wrapped up, the significance of the so-called Lima Accord. And what is this firewall?
Well, the Lima Accord is important basically because it keeps moving things forward towards Paris. And because it begins to shape the deal that we're going to see at Paris. There's a few important things there. One, there is now an obligation or a commitment from the bigger developing economies such as India, China, Brazil, that they will have to cut their greenhouse gas emissions going forward, and they're going to have to begin putting their plans on the table by March, although there is wiggle room on those deadlines, and India in particular is taking it. Two, following that very passionate and moving address from Ian Fry, there is actually a provision now written in the document for loss and damage. That means countries that could lose everything with climate change, like these low-lying states, you know, that can't save themselves by putting up a little seawall or something. There is going to be a commitment to help them there. I can't say that this is a great agreement. No one's going to say that, but I think it keeps things moving forward. And I think it keeps some important principles alive. One is that we are all in this together. Everybody's got to do their part. Two, you know, we have to help everybody out, including those most vulnerable states like Tuvalu. And three, I think it's important that even the leaders here acknowledge that there's not very much in the way of teeth in this agreement. It depends on something they're calling peer pressure. And I think that gives a really big role to the public to put pressure on these leaders and show that they have to do something.
Nitin Sethi, you are shaking your head in New Delhi. Can you talk about India's particular role and Suzanne Goldenberg's assessment?
I see slightly different from Susan in the sense what we really saw was a passing of burden away from developed countries to developing countries, and not even a sense of evolving common but differentiated responsibilities. Let me suggest the three things that I witnessed. One was a complete passover on the conversation on finance. Two, a reference to loss and damage in the preambular section, which just says, oh, we remember last year we talked about loss and damage, we shall continue to talk about it next 2 years. Three, absolute red line saying the phrase equity should not enter any dialogue in the future on climate change. Four, absolute red line saying intellectual property rights and how to look at reducing the costs of green technologies for the poor countries cannot be mentioned in any new agreement. Now, what it suggests to you is that developed countries do not wish to really either part with finances or technologies, but they do want to part with their existing commitments and pass it on to the post-2020 era, where the developing countries also take it. As Asad was saying, there is no action that's going to happen between now and 2020. all of that was to be done by the developed countries. This basically have just said at Lima that we're not going to do any more than what we're doing so far. And the burden can shift on to the post-2020 era, where other developing countries have to share it. So to me, it indicates really negotiation in bad faith.